Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and we're now going to talk about Walking Dead and the season 10 finale, or the supposed season 10 finale, titled A Certain Doom. And I use the word supposed because we had the recent news that the show was going to be finally ending on its 11th season, yet we were going to be getting 6 additional episodes to this 10th season, along with an extended amount of episodes for the final season 11. And it's been rumoured now these additional 6 episodes will air now in the spring of 2021. But I still deem it a finale, as most will, because this is bringing a conclusion towards the end of the Whisperer conflict, which has now lasted since the middle part of season 9 and throughout all of season 10. So there will be spoilers in this review, so I warn you now, if you have not yet seen this episode finale, I advise you now to stop watching, go and watch the episode, and then come back and watch this review, because I will be going in depth about what happened within this episode. Following this episode, we continue after the events of the tower, the previous episode, where Beta had been leading a massive amount of walkers to infiltrate the main bases, the Hilltop, Alexandria, Oceanside, etc. Following the death of Alpha, of course, Beta now was all hell-bent on revenge and just taking out everybody within the heroes group. So that's where we ended on the previous story. Now we picked up with this episode where we kind of get a disjointed feel as we cut in between where all the heroes are at the moment. So we see earlier scenes of Yumiko, Eugene and Ezekiel. Of course, they were joined by Princess, who they met previously, and they were of course embarking on Eugene's quest to meet up with Stephanie, who we know from previous episodes he'd been in radio contact with, and we were going to get further revelations as to who she is and whether she was with any large group accompanying her. We also cut in between Gabriel as he was laying out the plans to build a resistance against the Whisperer forces, and we also see Daryl and Carol kind of getting their weapons together and laying on to repel the Whisperer walkers as they begin their all-out final assault. And I think very early on there were lots of great tension throughout on here as we see the heroes. They use that tried and trusted strategy of where they have to camouflage themselves in the zombie blood to walk amongst the walkers, and whenever they embark on this tactic, it always ensures, I think, a lot of dread and a lot of tension, because they have to obviously walk silently amongst the zombies to make sure that they don't give away themselves by making any noise or talking to alert the zombies who they are. So we get these very prolonged and very tense filled scenes of them walking in silence, and the music ramps up as they walk in and amongst the walkers. One thing I did notice is that they didn't cover up their faces this time as we see them walking in amongst the walkers. They covered their coats, and previous seasons I'm pretty sure they've had to cover up literally the whole face and the whole hands to mask the detection from the walkers, but they didn't do that this time round. So they carried on, and we see that Daryl is walking in amongst them, and of course amongst the walkers you also have the Whisperers, humans wearing masks. So there was an extra tension there because Daryl, as well as making sure that he wasn't detected, he had to also look out for the Whisperers. And we see those early parts where we see the Whisperers, they're carrying their knives in their hands, and Daryl had to be wary of them. Now luckily enough, we had the other heroes in the building, and they were picking off all the Whisperers, using them and shooting them with arrows. But then Beta noticed that they were doing this, so he ordered the herd to tighten up together. Therefore, it would make it a lot more difficult for them to pick off the Whisperers. So the tension ensured throughout. We also had a sudden development where they were setting up tripwires, because we saw Gabriel and Lydia and the others setting up the fortress, and then all of a sudden an explosion arrives, and we see now that the Whisperers are really encountering the building, and we see that really gruesome shot of that one Whisperer. I think he has an arrow in his eye as he set off one of the tripwires and the explosions. And again, this is all wrapping up the tension as Gabriel and the others were really trapped in the building. We had that earlier scene where we saw Negan talking with Lydia, and he was kind of expressing his reluctance to help the group. He was seemingly accepting their fate, and he had decided that there was no particular way they were going to make it out of this. Back and forth again about how Negan, was he going to help the group or not, and we see that scene where he gives Lydia Alpha's mask, so there's a kind of a full circle moment. We get that really gruesome scene where we see Carol walk along with Beatrice, I think, in and amongst the walkers, and we see that one of the Whisperers notices who they are. She gets stabbed, Carol fends them off, but then the Whisperer comes out again and he stabs Beatrice in her foot. Obviously that's really painful. She screams out loud, and this alerts the walkers as to who she is, and then we get that gruesome sequence where we see Beatrice getting eaten away and taken apart. It was quite gruesome, and they did this for a couple of sequences throughout this scene where we see a couple of people not making it through. No big characters died during the sequence, which I'll mention about later on in this review. It was really intense and quite gruesome scenes, really had you on the edge of your seat and really gripped throughout on here, and they did very well. They've always had a very good ability within the show in terms of their practical makeup, their costume design, and their effects in terms of showing really gruesome, brutal deaths, and this was no exception here. It really was gripping stuff to watch. As the sequence continues, we see that Carol, she finds Lydia, who is wearing Alpha's masks, and she noticed that Lydia is who she is because we see her carrying the bag. So she finds Lydia and they continue on. And then we had a really out of nowhere development here where the Whisperers are infiltrating them, and then we hear this music, and it's kind of this 80s rock music that they use to drive the herd away. Now the song, if you know your 80s songs, I think it's by Talking Heads, and it's called Burning Down the House. And it was really out of left field because you're thinking, well, where did they get that music box from? And also, why didn't they use this previously? You know, we have seen in previous seasons where they've used many devices to draw away walkers, but if you had that sort of device, why didn't you use it earlier? You know, we look at previous episodes where the hilltop was attacked, of course, by the Whisperers. Could have used this kind of device back then. And you have to remember that, okay, Alpha and Beta were dictating the Whisperers, but there's so many of them. If you do use a device such as this, it will draw loads of the Whisperers away, distort all the walkers, and it will take away that control away from Alpha and Beta. So I did wonder why they didn't use that device before, and it really just came out of nowhere. And to me, I think it lessened the tension because you had this rock music, and we further on a sequence where they were driving on the wagon with the horses with this musical box, and they were driving the walkers away. And again, they must have been driving for hours because they were going into the night. So you just question the logic and the plausibility of it all, that they were able to play this constant music again and again and again, able to lead the herd away and also not attract any other walkers coming towards them. So that was a bit of a plausibility that I picked out, but we kept going, and all of a sudden the Whisperers were probably getting tired of walking the slow charge, so they were using the zombies as shield, and they started running towards the heroes. So then they had to come off the wagon and start shooting them with their arrows. This was another intense scene, and we see lots of people getting cut down as the Whisperers are making their charge towards them. In the end, they decide it's too much and they have to abandon the wagon following one of the wheels coming off, and they had to leave the music and the horses, unfortunately, as well. So it was good fight scenes and choreography again, but I just think some of the tension was lessened by the rock music that you didn't have to have continuously playing throughout this scene. We move on again where we see that Daryl decides to go back to save Gabriel and the other ones, as we see that they're further trapped on here. Lydia mentions the fact that she has the ability to lead the walkers away, but Daryl doesn't trust her or doesn't believe that she can. They did mention the location of the cliff, and again, this was out of left field. I just think, again, this was one episode that there were certain developments and certain key aspects that they could have done more to build up throughout. But we move on with the story, and Daryl goes back, and we later on see Gabriel is really trapped now, and he talks with Judith, and he ultimately decides that he's going to stay and fend them off, giving the others a chance to escape. So as they escape down the lift where they're using the rope to climb themselves down, We see now the Whisperers, they break through the door and they're kicking and beating down Gabriel. And yes, I admit, I thought this was the point where Gabriel was going to finally die. I think we've come across multiple season finales where it always seems like Gabriel is going to meet his end, but he somehow comes through it and survives. So I thought this was going to be the point here where he does ultimately meet his death, but he doesn't at the end. We see this really cool person come out of nowhere and start fighting them off, and then we see this person in the hat, and all of a sudden it's Maggie coming out of the way, out of nowhere, to save Gabriel. Now, we did all know that Maggie was going to come back in some capacity, but again, it just, to me, just questioned logically, because she came out of nowhere. They would have had to fight their way through all of those other Whisperers and all the other herd, and there was only, I think, 3 of them at the time. So again, it just really stretched credibility, I think, to just have Maggie come out of nowhere like that just to save Gabriel. If they had hinted somewhere that maybe Maggie was around in some capacity earlier on in the episode, then you might have been able to swallow it a bit more, but to just have her come out of nowhere was a bit, I just think, over the top and a bit less than the credibility. We keep going and we see now that the Whisperers are really hunting now the main heroes, and they seem to be really outnumbered and overrun. And then we see the point now where Beta is strutting through, and he sees, first of all, he hears Lydia, and Lydia, as I mentioned before, she's wearing Alpha's mask, and I think he calls her out. So Beta now is starting to get a bit more disorientated. He's getting flashbacks of him and Alpha, and then later on we see Negan call out Beta, and then that draws Beta to come out and fight with Negan. And I know for a fact that this was a moment that a lot of comic book fans were very much looking forward to, the big fight between Negan and Beta, but I think unfortunately it was very anticlimactic. I think they could have drawn this fight sequence out a lot more, but it's very quick, it's very short, and then later on Daryl comes in and he stabs Beta in both of his eyes, and then we get this weird flashback cutscene, and I think the lighting and the filtering goes in this kind of yellow, faded yellow filter, and we see Beta getting flashbacks to him and Alpha and other moments throughout the season, and we see that scene where he's putting the knives out of his eyes, really gruesome stuff when we see the blood pouring from his eyes, and then he ultimately gets surrounded by the other walkers, and then they consume him, and we see Beta meet his end. And as I mentioned before, this was really anticlimactic, because now that you've dismissed Alpha, you've built up Beta as this huge force. You'd always imagine that when the villain comes to his end, there has to be a big climatic battle or a massive fight scene, and I just think they could have lengthened out the fight with Negan a lot more, just to make it a lot more exciting, a lot more tense, but they didn't. It felt too sharp, too sudden. Beta was beaten too easily, just to have Daryl sneak up behind him and stab him in the eyes. It just really, I felt, could have had a bit more weight to it, and as I mentioned before, just very anticlimactic. And I think it emphasized the fact that Beta was really a one-note antagonist once you take in Alpha out of the story. So we then continue even further now, and Lydia continues with leading the herd towards the cliff. She's joined by Carol, who asks that Lydia walks away, and that Carol will again lead the walkers towards the cliff. And this is just typical Carol at this point, always wanting to do things on her own, and almost seemingly always on a suicide mission. I've mentioned this multiple times in my reviews of previous episodes, but the problem we have now is that now we know from recent announcements that there is an intention to have a Daryl and Carol spin-off, right? So we know Carol is going to survive. So the dilemma they have now is any future episodes where you put Daryl or Carol in any kind of dangerous situations, the tension is all taken away, right? Because we know they'll both survive, because they have to proceed with their spin-off series, which I don't agree and I don't see the point of. But yeah, that was just another reason why I felt all the tension was taken away, having Carol walk slowly towards the cliff. So this was proven as well, because we see later on that Lydia pulls her away and they want to both survive, and then we see the Whisperers walking off the cliff, very slow motion shots, as we also see the mask of Alpha being thrown away by Lydia. very slow motion as we see the Whisperers pouring over the cliff, and this essentially brings an end to the Whisperer conflict. And overall, I think if we look at the story, it's very much of a happy ending all round. There was no major character deaths as what we've normally associated with the show, and I think, to be honest, the last couple of season finales, there haven't really been any major character deaths, and part of me is not too critical of that, because I think, especially when we look at season 7, season 8, the show itself had kind of descended to using character deaths as some sort of gimmick, just to provide some sort of sensation, some sort of shock to the episode, and I think it became too much commonplace and overall a bit cliched. So I think they're trying to break the trend and not become as predictable by killing off major characters just for shock value. So I didn't mind it too much, but again, I could have ramped up the tension a bit more on this. We later on see the fact that Connie now has managed to survive. I don't know how. She was stranded, if you remember, way back when they were under assault from the walkers back in the caves. I think it was the return of the mid-season premiere, I do believe so. So again, you wonder, where has Connie been all this time? What has she been up to? Did anybody find her? Has she been on her own? And she's obviously been through some sort of ordeal, because she collapses at the end, and then we see that Virgil finds her. So that'll be very interesting points going forward for season 11, or these extended 6 episodes, where I'm sure we'll get some sort of flashback to find out what happened to Connie and was she abducted or not, and then I'm sure they will build up the eventual reconciliation with the various other heroes, and whether they'll keep the intended romance going between her and Daryl, I'm not sure that they will yet, or will they dump that, because of course we know that Daryl's getting a spin-off with Carol, so I'm not sure in the long run what will happen there. So we cut back again to Eugene, Ezekiel, Yumiko and Princess, where we see them now. They're not giving up on their pursuit to reconcile with Stephanie. They're kind of out in the open here, and yeah, there was credibility stretched again, because Eugene, for some reason, he shouts out loud, you know, out in the open, calling out Stephanie. You know, you could have drawn walkers toward you or any other groups towards you. Why would you do that? Why were they not trying to conceal themselves? They're just out there in the open. So again, it was just more stupidity here. I actually thought at this point, when Eugene is giving this big speech about finding people and never giving up, I did actually think they were going to go for some sort of shocking climax and have Eugene be shot. I actually think, because it was such a prolonged speech, and you're thinking, why is he making this big speech towards the end of the episode? So I thought they were building up to have him actually taken out by a certain group, but they didn't. And then we see later on that the lights come on, and then that's where we see the emergence of the Commonwealth group. And if you know your comics or the mythology of The Walking Dead, you know that this is essentially the beginning of the Commonwealth storyline, the New World Order storyline, which I'm pretty sure will be the focus of season 11. So I think overall, if I'm judging this finale, I think it was in many ways a bit short-lived, a bit anticlimactic, but at the same time it was kind of satisfactory, because we had to bring this Whisperer War to a close. I think it really had exhausted all avenues of interest and compelling storyline. As I've mentioned previously, once you took Alpha at the mix, there was no real engaging character dynamics. Alpha was the one that really brought the fascinating elements when you look at her relationship with Alpha, her relationship with Beta, her relationship with Daryl. Those are all really fascinating conflicts, and I think we were denied a major showdown between her and Carol, you know, of course following where we saw previously the deaths of the likes of Henry, etc. So I think we were denied that as well. I also think the fight between Negan and Beta really should have been a lot more extended. They really could have gone for a much more of an epic climax than what they did. So there were a lot of things about this finale that really felt a bit short-lived. Again, I've mentioned before about having the boombox with the music kind of come out of nowhere. Again, the Maggie reveal, a bit unlikely. It's good to see Maggie. We knew she was coming back, but I think they could have delivered that moment a bit better on here. There were moments of dread and intense and gory moments, particularly in the first half of the episode. That was very good on there as well. But I think overall, it was a nice wrapping up of this story arc on here, and very much, like I said, a pretty much of an upbeat ending. So in many ways you can't really complain too much, and of course we have the setup of the Commonwealth arc for the 11th season. So overall, whilst I feel this could have been a much more of an epic finale, it's ultimately a satisfying end to the storyline. Again, it's a bit disappointing because you could argue, well, the whole reason for this series finale being delayed, if you remember, it was meant to, I think, air back in the beginning of April, but it delayed because of the COVID-19. The reason given was that they had to finish off the post-editing, which they had to do from remote locations. So you kind of felt, well, this really should be more of an epic finale because they've done a lot of the filming already, but the fact that they had to finish off post-editing, and this is kind of what we got, a bit more of a restrained and much more of a quicker finale. I just felt it could have been more, especially when you're ending a particular arc that's gone on now for a season and a half. You just need much more of an epic ending. But however, as I mentioned before, the Whisperer had really reached its expiry date, so we can now draw a close on this and go forward for the 11th season. So those are my overall thoughts and review for the season 10 finale of The Walking Dead. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Was this a finale episode that delivered for you? And it was only 40 minutes, which is, again, very short for this finale episode. Normally these finale episodes tend to be about an hour and 10 minutes. So again, that goes back to my initial comment as to how I think it was a bit short-lived. But did you think it was satisfactory, the fact that we've brought this Whisperer arc to a close and now we can draw forward and carry on for the season 11? So those are my thoughts on the Walking Dead season 10 finale. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons and help me grow this channel and provide more content for you in the future. I will try and see if I can do a review of the spin-off series, The World Beyond Walking Dead, that had its opening episode recently. I'll try and see if I can get a review out for that in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.